Hey everyone, welcome to our deep dive. Today we're going to be tackling something pretty big and kind of daunting, but also something we all got to deal with eventually.
It's change.
Exactly, change, but not just like coping with it.
Right.
We want to talk about how to actually thrive when life, throws those curveballs our way.
Absolutely.
Our guide for this whole exploration is Brad Stulberg's book, Master of Change.
Oh, good one.
I think what really grabbed me about it was how it kind of comes at this topic from all these different angles,
Yeah.
Like there's science history, personal stories,
Yeah.
even some stuff about art, and it all comes together to give us this totally fresh way of looking at something we all experience.
For sure.
And I'm so glad we have an awesome expert here with us who can help us unpack all these complex ideas and really figure out, what it all means for our own lives. So, ready to jump in?
Let's do it. One of the most interesting things this book does is challenge this concept we often just kind of take for granted.
What's that?
Homeostasis.
Homeostasis.
The idea that we're naturally wired for stability and change is this disruption we need to fight against.
Right, like we're constantly pushing against our own biology just to move forward.
Exactly. But Stulberg makes a really compelling case that maybe this view is a little outdated.
Interesting.
He points to evolution itself, like species that adapt, thrive, and those that resist, well, they don't tend to last very long.
So change from that perspective is actually the normal state of things.
Precisely.
Okay, I'm starting to see where he's going with this. So ditch the idea that change is something we always need to fight. But if it's so natural, then why does it often feel so hard for us? Like, why do we resist it so much?
That's where the book brings up this idea of rugged flexibility and uses a pretty gripping story about this professional climber, Tommy Caldwell, to illustrate it.
Oh, I know of him. He's the guy who free climbed the Dawn Wall, right?
Yeah.
Incredibly difficult stuff.
Right. But before that incredible feat, Caldwell had this harrowing experience in Kyrgyzstan. Imagine this. He and his fellow climbers were taken hostage by armed rebels. Talk about unexpected change.
Oh, wow. They were held captive for days, hiking through mountains, fearing for their lives. Caldwell even had to push one of his captors off a cliff to escape.
That's intense. That's an extreme example of rugged flexibility, if I've ever heard one. But for most of us, thankfully, the changes we face aren't quite so dramatic. So how can we cultivate this rugged flexibility in our everyday lives?
The book lays out some practical strategies. One key idea is shifting our focus from a having orientation to a being orientation.
Break that down for me. What exactly does that mean?
It's about defining ourselves by who we are at our core, not by things outside of us, possessions, job titles, social status.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing our inherent qualities and values.
So instead of saying I'm a marketing director, it becomes I'm a creative person who loves connecting with people.
Precisely.
Okay, I see.
The book argues that when we define ourselves by what we have, we become vulnerable. Because when we lose those things, we feel like we've lost a part of ourselves. That makes a lot of sense. I'm thinking about that story in the book about Christine, the marketing director who lost her job during COVID.
Ah, perfect example. Christine really struggled with her identity when she was laid off. But this very disruption actually led her to rediscover this lifelong passion for writing. She ended up starting her own business and pursuing her childhood dream of becoming an author.
Wow, what a powerful illustration of how even really difficult changes can lead to fulfilling outcomes. It sounds like Christine had to let go of that rigid sense of self in order to get there.
Absolutely. That's a core principle of rugged flexibility. Strengthen your values and your identity while also staying open to adapting and evolving as life throws those curveballs. It's about knowing yourself, but also embracing the potential for growth.
I love that. So far, we've talked about embracing change, cultivating rugged flexibility, and shifting from having to being. What else does the book highlight as essential for mastering change?
This is where things get really fascinating. The book explores the neuroscience of expectations, explaining how our brains basically function as prediction machines.
Prediction machines. That's an interesting way to put it.
Our brains are constantly generating predictions about the future and then comparing those predictions to what actually happens. When they align, we feel good. But when there's a mismatch, especially if we're overly optimistic, that's when we experience suffering.
So how we experience change is largely determined by our expectations.
Precisely. Think about the emergence of the COVID Delta variant in 2021.
Oh, yeah.
Objectively, things were getting better, but then Delta came along and kind of dashed our hopes for a quick return to normalcy. That mismatch between our hopeful predictions and the disappointing reality really amplified our collective suffering.
Like being told you're almost at the finish line of a marathon only to find out there are miles left to go.
Exactly. That's why managing expectations is so crucial, especially during times of change. If we anticipate difficulties, we'll be less thrown off when they inevitably arise. It's about preparing ourselves mentally and emotionally for the unexpected.
Which brings us to a concept I found really intriguing. Tragic optimism. Can you unpack that a bit?
Sure, tragic optimism isn't about pretending everything is sunshine and rainbows. It's about acknowledging the tough stuff in life, the pain, the suffering, the impermanence, but not letting those things crush your spirit. It's about choosing to move forward with hope and purpose, even when things are hard.
It sounds incredibly powerful, but also really challenging.
Yeah.
Any tips for cultivating this tragic optimism in our own lives?
The book offers several strategies. One is focusing on what you can control and letting go of what you can't.
Right, focusing on our sphere of influence.
Exactly. Another is finding meaning and purpose in your actions, even in the midst of difficult situations.
So accepting what we can't change, having the courage to change what we can, and the wisdom to know the difference.
You got it.
Yeah.
And that wisdom, that ability to respond thoughtfully instead of just reacting impulsively, that's fundamental for navigating change effectively. It's a skill that takes practice and intention.
And we'll be exploring that distinction between responding and reacting in much more depth in the next part of our deep dive. But before we move on, I want to touch on this idea of making meaning amidst change. The book acknowledges that sometimes that advice to find the silver lining can feel kind of trite, especially when you're going through something truly difficult. It's not always about forcing a positive spin on things.
Right, and the book addresses that directly. It even delves into some personal experiences, including your own journey with OCD and depression.
It's important to normalize these struggles, to recognize that everyone, even those who study resilience and well-being, experience those dark times. It's part of being human.
Absolutely. The book makes a crucial point. Sometimes the best response to significant change is simply allowing ourselves to feel the full weight of it. Forcing meaning or positivity before we're ready can actually hinder healing.
It's about giving ourselves grace and space to grieve, to process, to heal, and acknowledging that all those emotions are valid.
And speaking of healing and growth, we'll dig into those and how they relate to mastering change even more in the next part of our deep dive.
Stay tuned. Things are about to get even more insightful.
Okay, so let's pick up where we left off and really delve into that distinction between responding and reacting to change.
I feel like it's such a subtle difference, but I have a feeling it has huge implications for how we deal with all those twists and turns life throws at us.
Oh, you're absolutely right. Reacting is often that knee-jerk response fueled by emotions like fear or anger, those primal instincts that can really cloud our judgment and lead to choices we end up regretting.
Right, it's like that initial impulsive reaction.
Exactly. Whereas responding involves taking a step back, pausing to assess the situation before taking action.
So it's more about making conscious choices that are aligned with our values, even when we're feeling stressed or overwhelmed.
Precisely. It's a much more mindful approach.
So it's not about suppressing our emotions, but rather choose how we respond to them.
Exactly. The book actually delves into the neuroscience behind this, contrasting the rage pathway in the brain with the seeking pathway. Have you ever noticed how when you get angry, it becomes almost impossible to think straight?
Oh, absolutely. Logic goes right out the window.
That's the rage pathway kicking in. It's our fight or flight response preparing us to deal with threats. The problem is, most of the threats we encounter these days aren't actually life or death situations.
Like a stressful email or getting stuck in traffic isn't exactly a saber-toothed tiger.
Precisely. So reacting from that place of rage often means overreacting and making choices that don't serve us well. The seeking pathway, on the other hand, is associated with planning, problem-solving, pursuing goals.
So if rage is like slamming on the brakes, seeking is more like navigating a detour.
I like that analogy. And what's really fascinating is that activating the seeking pathway actually inhibits the rage pathway. They work in opposition.
Oh, wow. So by focusing on what we can do, on taking constructive steps, we can actually calm down that stress response.
Exactly. This is where the book emphasizes the power of wise action. It's about pairing that tragic optimism, that acceptance of life's hardships, with concrete efforts to make things better.
It's like channeling that acceptance into action.
Right. And the book highlights a great example here. Brian Stevenson, the lawyer and social justice advocate.
Oh, he's such an inspiring figure.
He's dedicated his life to fighting racial injustice and mass incarceration, working within a system that's riddled with suffering and inequality.
And yet, despite all these immense challenges, he manages to maintain this incredible sense of hope and purpose.
He truly embodies wise action. He acknowledges the darkness without letting it paralyze him. He just keeps working tirelessly to spark change within a deeply flawed system.
It's a potent reminder that even when we're facing really tough challenges, we can still choose to act in ways that are aligned with our values.
Absolutely. And speaking of values, the book highlights how crucial they are for navigating change effectively.
Especially during those big life transitions, career changes, relationship shifts, even just figuring out who we are and what we want in life.
Values act as a compass, guiding our decisions, particularly when we feel lost or uncertain.
I'm thinking about the example of Roger Federer, widely considered one of the greatest tennis players of all time.
Federer's career is a fantastic example of both ruggedness and flexibility. He managed to stay at the top of his game for decades, but he didn't do it by staying the same. He had to adapt his approach as he got older. He had to evolve to remain competitive.
He could have so easily just clung to what had worked in the past, resisted changing his training or his style.
But instead, he embraced the necessity of evolution.
And in doing so, he extended his career, achieving a level of longevity rarely seen in professional sports.
It's truly remarkable.
It's like he held on to those core values, his love for the game, his drive to excel, but he was flexible in how he expressed those values. That balance seems so key.
Precisely. And the book draws a really interesting parallel with the New York Times, a media organization that's faced immense disruption in the digital age. They had to adapt to survive.
They could have easily clung to that traditional print model, resisted the shift to online platforms.
But they recognized they needed to evolve while staying true to their core values, quality journalism and in-depth reporting.
And that willingness to adapt allowed them to not just survive, but to thrive in this rapidly changing media landscape. They were early adopters of digital subscriptions. They invested heavily in podcasts and multimedia content, all while maintaining that commitment to high-quality journalism.
It's a perfect example of how organizations, just like individuals, can benefit from combining ruggedness with flexibility.
Okay, so we've talked about embracing change, cultivating rugged flexibility, shifting from having to being, and the importance of values. But what about when our sense of self, our identity, is challenged by change? How do we find stability amidst all that flux? How do we maintain a sense of who we are when everything around us is shifting?
That's such a profound question, and the book tackles it head-on, introducing this concept of cultivating a fluid sense of self.
That sounds intriguing. Tell me more.
Imagine this. A rigid sense of self is like a house built on a fault line. When the ground shakes, that whole structure is at risk of collapsing. It's just too brittle.
Whereas a fluid sense of self is more like a tree that can bend with the wind, adapting to its environment without breaking.
Exactly. It's about having boundaries that can flex and adapt as needed. Boundaries that provide structure but also allow for movement.
The book uses this great example. Nils van der Poel, the Olympic speed skater, who intentionally cultivated a wide range of interests and hobbies outside of his sport.
Van der Poel realized that defining himself solely as an athlete made him vulnerable to all the inherent ups and downs of a competitive career. So he made a conscious effort to develop other aspects of his identity, spending time with friends, pursuing hobbies, just being a regular guy, even while he was training at an elite level.
It's like diversifying a portfolio, but for meaning.
Exactly.
Okay.
And this made him much more resilient to the pressures and uncertainties of competitive sports. Even if he had a bad race or got injured, his entire sense of self wasn't riding on his athletic performance. He had other sources of fulfillment.
It's a powerful reminder that we are all multifaceted beings with so many different roles and passions that contribute to who we are. We're not just one thing.
And embracing that complexity, allowing ourselves to evolve and grow without losing our core essence, that's essential for mastering change.
I love that the book also shares this really touching story about Ginger, a devout Christian and Southern lady whose daughter came out as gay.
It's a beautiful example of how our values can guide us through those unexpected life changes.
Ginger had this very specific vision of her daughter's life, the traditional wedding, the whole 9 yards. And when her daughter came out, it challenged that vision, those preconceived notions. It forced her to re-examine her beliefs.
But instead of clinging to a rigid sense of self or rejecting her daughter, Ginger chose to adapt.
She found a way to embrace her daughter's identity while still holding on to her own beliefs and values.
It's a powerful reminder that love and acceptance can coexist with differing viewpoints.
It really highlights how a fluid sense of self, allows us to navigate those moments when our worldviews are challenged, when we're confronted with something that doesn't quite fit our preconceptions.
Exactly. This ability to adapt, to evolve our perspectives while staying true to our core values is so crucial for thriving in a world that's constantly changing.
Speaking of navigating a changing world, the book also offers some insights into how our modern media landscape, particularly social media and cable news, can actually hinder our ability to respond thoughtfully to change.
It's a really interesting point. These platforms are designed to grab our attention, to keep us engaged. And often that means appealing to our emotions, especially fear and anger.
It's like they're constantly triggering our rage pathways, creating the sense of urgency and outrage. They keep us in this heightened state of alert.
Exactly. And that constant bombardment of negativity makes it so difficult to step back, to pause, to process information thoughtfully. We're constantly reacting instead of reflecting.
It's like we're being conditioned to react impulsively rather than respond thoughtfully.
The book introduces a really helpful heuristic for navigating the 2Ps versus 4Ps approach.
Yeah.
Ask yourself, does this media source encourage me to panic and pummel ahead, or does it encourage me to pause, process, plan, and proceed?
That's a really practical tool for becoming more mindful about how we're consuming information.
And that mindfulness, that awareness of how our emotions are being manipulated is crucial for reclaiming our agency and responding to change in a way that aligns with our values.
It's about choosing to engage with sources that encourage thoughtful reflection rather than knee-jerk reaction.
Precisely. And by making those conscious choices, by cultivating a more responsive approach to the information we consume, we can better equip ourselves to navigate the complexities of a constantly changing world.
So in the final part of our deep dive, we're going to explore one of the most challenging aspects of change-making meaning amidst those life disruptions that really shake us to our core. Those moments when even wise action might feel impossible.
It's a crucial topic and one that the book approaches with both honesty and sensitivity.
Stay tuned because we're about to get really real about the messy, often painful, but ultimately transformative power of change. Okay, so let's dive into this idea of making meaning when those really big life disruptions hit, the ones that shake you to your core.
It's definitely a tough process because it's one thing to talk about rugged flexibility and wise action in theory, but when you're dealing with a major loss or a serious illness or some other life-altering event, finding meaning can feel impossible.
And the book doesn't try to sugarcoat it or offer those kind of empty platitudes. It really acknowledges the difficulty of those situations.
It does, and instead of offering simplistic solutions, it delves into these genuine personal experiences, like your willingness to share about your own struggles with OCD and depression. I found that incredibly insightful and brave.
Well, thanks. It's so important to normalize those challenges, to show people that everyone, even those who study resilience and well-being, go through those dark times. It's part of the human experience.
For sure. And the book emphasizes that sometimes the best approach is to simply allow ourselves to fully feel those difficult emotions.
Not trying to suppress them or pretend they're not there.
Right. It's not about ignoring them or trying to force positivity.
Because sometimes trying to find a silver lining or force meaning before we're ready can actually get in the way of healing.
Absolutely. Our psychological immune system, just like our physical immune system, needs time to process those tough experiences. Pushing for resolution too soon can be detrimental.
So it's not about denying the pain or pretending everything's okay. It's about giving ourselves the grace and the space to grieve, to process, to heal, and recognizing that it's a process.
Exactly. And the book also highlights how our perception of time can get kind of distorted during these intense periods. Everything feels elongated, like we're stuck in slow motion.
Oh, I can totally relate to that. When I was going through my divorce, it felt like time had literally stopped. It was so disorienting.
The book actually cites research by neuroscientist David Eagleman showing how our brains perceive time differently when we're in these heightened emotional states. Those difficult experiences really do feel longer. It's not just our imagination.
That's fascinating. It makes sense when you think about how our brains are wired to prioritize potential threats. When we encounter hardship, those survival mechanisms kick in, making everything feel more urgent and intense.
Precisely. And this really underscores the book's emphasis on patience and self-compassion during these times. It's about acknowledging that healing is a gradual process and accepting that it's okay to not be okay.
There's no set timeline for it.
Exactly. And the book also challenges that common misconception that we need to have everything figured out right away.
Like we need to have this big epiphany or profound takeaway immediately.
Right. But as the book points out, meaning often unfolds more gradually. It emerges as we reflect on those experiences and integrate them into our life stories.
We might not realize the significance of an event until years later when we can look back and see how it shaped us and led us to where we are today.
It's like gaining that retrospective insight.
I'm thinking of the story of Jay Ashman from the book The Former Neo-Nazi, who eventually found healing and purpose by speaking out against hate and bigotry.
Ashman's transformation is such a powerful reminder that even those incredibly difficult experiences can become sources of meaning and positive change.
It wasn't this instantaneous shift for him. It took years of therapy, introspection, and deliberate action to find his path.
And that's a crucial reminder. Healing isn't a destination, it's an ongoing journey. It's about taking those small steps day by day toward a more fulfilling and meaningful life.
So we don't need all the answers right away, and we don't need to force meaning. We just need to keep moving forward, trusting that the clarity and purpose will come.
Absolutely. And the book offers some really practical advice for those times when we feel stuck, when even taking a small step seems impossible.
One strategy that really resonated with me was behavioral activation.
It's such a simple but powerful concept. When we're feeling down, engaging in activities that bring us joy or a sense of accomplishment can make a huge difference.
It's about breaking free from that inertia, even if it's just for a few minutes each day.
Exactly. It doesn't have to be anything grand. Going for a walk in nature, listening to music, spending time with loved ones, anything that shifts our energy and perspective can help.
The book also talks about the importance of seeking support during those challenging times.
Whether it's therapy support groups or confiding in trusted friends and family, connecting with others can make a world of difference.
There's this misconception that asking for help is a sign of weakness, but the book emphasizes that recognizing when you need support actually takes strength and courage.
Absolutely. And often those moments of vulnerability when we allow ourselves to be seen and heard are what give us the strength to keep going, to make sense of what we're going through.
It's about recognizing that we're not alone in our struggles, that everyone faces hardships and there's no shame in reaching out for help.
Right. Embracing that sense of interconnectedness, building a support network, that's what creates a foundation for resilience and growth.
As we wrap up our deep dive into mastering change, I'm feeling this sense of hope and empowerment.
It's not about avoiding change or pretending it's always easy. It's about developing the skills, the mindset, and the support systems to navigate life's inevitable ups and downs in a way that allows us to grow, to learn, and ultimately to thrive.
And maybe even become a little bit more masterful in the process.
So to help you on that journey toward mastering change, here are 10 key takeaways from our exploration of Brad Stulberg's Master of Change. First, homeostasis isn't the whole story. Embrace change as a natural part of life and focus on adaptation. Second, cultivate rugged flexibility, be strong in your values, but also adaptable in the face of challenges. Third, shift from having to being. Define yourself by your inner qualities, not external possessions or status. Fourth, manage your expectations, anticipate difficulties to lessen the sting of disappointment and suffering. Fifth, embrace tragic optimism, find meaning and purpose even in the midst of hardships. Sixth, take wise action, pair your optimism with concrete steps that align with your values. Seventh, know your values, use them as a compass to guide your decisions and actions, especially during times of uncertainty. Eighth, develop a fluid sense of self, cultivate a flexible identity that allows you to adapt without losing your core self. Ninth, respond, don't react, pause before making decisions, process information thoughtfully, and make choices that align with your values. And finally, 10th, be patient with yourself. Healing takes time, so be kind to yourself throughout the process.
This has been such an incredible deep dive. Exploring Master Change with you has been a real pleasure. To our listeners, thank you for joining us on this journey. We encourage you to reflect on what resonated with you today and think about how you might apply these insights to your own life. Until next time, keep embracing change, keep growing, and keep diving deep.